let's take a look back at Darkman, which is a 1990 American superhero horror film directed and co-written by Sam Raimi, also co-written by his brother Ivan and Chuck Pfarrer, whose second name is just a random collection of consonants, it would seem. Liam Neeson stars as Peyton Westlake, a brilliant scientist who is designing synthetic skin, which will come important later on, because he gets attacked by Robert Durant, played by Larry Drake, leaving him horribly disfigured and scarred when he miraculously survives his lab being blown up, because his girlfriend, played by Frances McDormand, has discovered incriminating evidence against a corrupt property developer who is Colin Friels. After a failed experimental treatment to treat his horrific burns, Peyton develops superhuman abilities, which come with a slight side effect of leaving him highly mentally unstable and borderline psychotic. He uses these superpowers, his instability and his synthetic skin technology to terrorize and seek vengeance against those who took everything from him. The genesis of Darkman came about with Raimi being interested in adapting a comic book superhero to the big screen. He attempted to acquire the rights to do so for both a Shadow and Batman, failing in both instances. His initial premise for the character was as someone who could change their face, gaining further inspiration from the universal horrors of the 30s and 40s, along with movies such as Phantom of the Opera and Elephant Man, with Phantom being a very obvious inspiration as soon as Peyton becomes disfigured. Raimi said of the universal horrors and their inspiration behind Darkman that they made me fear the hideous nature of the hero, and at the same time drew me to him. I went back to their idea of a man who is noble and turns into a monster. Having turned this into first a 30-page treatment, then a 40-page short story, Universal Studios greenlit the project but suggested further rewrites. After a further 12 script rewrites, the story eventually ended up with a semi-tragic love story being added, in the vein of The Hunchback of Notre Dame, about a man who has, in Raimi's words, lost his face and had to take on other faces, a man who battles criminals using this power. This was actually Raimi's first studio film and was given a final budget of $14 million. It was also Liam Neeson's first action film too, which we'd all probably wish at this point he'd stopped making them, but I digress. It wouldn't be a look back at though without some studio interference with the film's vision. Firstly, they assigned an editor that Raimi found difficult to work with and who ended up quitting the project due to a nervous breakdown partway through assembling the first cut of the film. Early test screenings were a disaster, with some test audiences saying it was the worst film they had ever seen, and Universal execs pronouncing it as some of the worst test screening scores in the studio's history, with producer Robert Durant saying, "The experience on Darkman was very difficult for Sam and me. It isn't the picture we thought it should be, based on the footage we shot and all that. The studio got nervous about some kind of wild things in it, and made us take them out, which was unfortunate." The film was actually a box office and critical success on release, earning $48.8 million worldwide, with the critical consensus largely being that Darkman is gruesome and deliciously broad. Sam Raimi's Darkman bears the haunted soulfulness of gothic tragedy while packing the stylistic verve of onomatopoeia springing off a comic strip page. Much of this success can probably be attributed to the brilliant marketing campaign that had posters being produced in advance of release with a silhouette of Peyton with the slogan "Who is Darkman?" creating early buzz for the film. It must be around 15, maybe even 20 years since I had seen Darkman, being a movie I saw so many times as a teen and always wondering why it had never received any sequels. Imagine my surprise to find out it actually received 2 straight-to-video sequels, with neither Neeson or Raimi returning to star or direct, but Raimi did act as producer on both. Critical consensus was not favourable towards either. Raimi not getting as involved in the sequels isn't a massive surprise really, due to the studio's interference on the original, with him actually secretly re-editing the film after Universal had told him to lock it and print the negative, with Robert Durant saying, "We spent 48 hours basically recutting the entire movie, restoring things we thought were important." As I write this, we just got the Snyder Cut. Having heard about the studio interference, I want the Raimi cut of Darkman, with it originally being 2 hours long cut down to 85 minutes at studio insistence. Darkman for me wears its inspirations very much on its sleeve, with the Phantom of the Opera being the most obvious, with Peyton wearing a cape and skulking in the shadows pining for his love. The look of his laboratory in a warehouse is dark, grimy and grim, and is very obviously inspired by the universal horror Frankenstein, also having a very noir feel to the lighting and look of the rest of the film, just like you would imagine an adaptation of The Shadow would have. The entire film is very dark both in tone and look, to be honest. It's a very stark contrast to modern day comic book movies that are largely fairly bright and humorous, having a very gothic horror feel, weaving together elements of classic noir, crime, revenge dramas, mad scientist horror and classical tragic love stories. Liam Neeson is excellent as Peyton, even though you barely get to see his actual face, except in the very beginning and for short periods after he is disfigured. Which my abiding memory of this film was just how disgustingly disfigured he is, and my memory had not played tricks on me. He looks horrific in the very best way possible. You really sense the conflicted emotional battle going on within his mind as he tries to keep a lid on his increasing mental instability and rekindle his normal life with Julie. Speaking of whom, Frances McDormand, the actress who portrayed her, apparently had various problems with Raimi during production. As she said herself, "I was struggling with technically how to make movies, so it was an adjustment for me to figure out my purpose inside Sam's technical world of making a movie. You wouldn't be able to tell from the final cut of the film as she works well against Neeson's Peyton. The special effects largely hold up even after more than 3 decades, with Raimi's famed over-the-top visual practical effects style being toned down markedly here in favour of a more subtle exploration of the characters. Just a few composite green screen shots are very noticeable, but the miniatures, prosthetics and a few stop motion sequences still look excellent." So that was Darkman, probably for me one of the best comic book superhero movies ever made, but is largely overlooked in that conversation because it was created for the screen, being inspired by rather than originating in comic book form, only after release going on to become a comic book. Raimi, its creator, also going on to write and direct 2 exceptionally good Spider-Man movies that are very much in the mix for that title, overshadowing his earlier work. Oh, and Bruce Campbell makes a cameo right at the end, being the final disguise for Darkman, so technically I guess he is Darkman. Best movie ever made, 5 stars out of 5.